Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, viewers. I'm Huma Sheikh. I'm a teacher and a writer. Today, we have gathered at the Forum of Liberty Books to celebrate the author and novelist Taha Kehar and his book, Typically Tanya. Hello, Taha. Welcome to
Hello,
the show.
how are you?
And how are you doing?
All well, all well. Thank you so much for
Okay.
being here. Thank you for Liberty Books for having us
Yes.
here. Yeah.
Thank you. Today, we are celebrating a law graduate from SOAS, London. Kehar is the author of two novels, Typically Tanya, HarperCollins India, 2018, and of Rift and Rivalry, Palimpsest Publishers, 2014. He is the co-editor of The Stained Glass Window, Stories of the Pandemic from Pakistan, published by Liberty Books, 2020. Kehar has served as the head of the Express Tribune's Peshawar City Pages and bi-monthly books page, and in the news on Sunday, The Hindu, and South Asia Magazine, and his short fiction has appeared in the Delhi-based quarterly, The Equator Line, the biannual journal, and Pakistani literature, the Alif Review, The Bridge, Volume 2, and the OUP anthology, I'll Find My Way. Two of his short stories appeared in an anthology titled The Bunyan and Her Roots, which has been edited by the British writer Jade Adams. In 2019, Kehar published his first novel, Glamorous,
Okay, I believe Huma's voice is, I think she has to reconnect. So, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's a pleasure to bring Typically Tanya yet again to Liberty Books. It's my second session with them this year, and I'm extremely delighted to be here. And Huma has just logged in. Are you okay?
Yes, can you hear me now? Can
Yeah,
I?
we can. Do you want to switch devices or something? Is that going to make it
Uh,
easier?
I'll just see this from now. I'm okay. Let's see this now.
All right,
So
yeah.
I don't know how much of your bio I read out, and
Uh, it's okay.
so
We can skip the bios and move on.
okay.
Yeah.
So that Taha, this question must have been asked to you several times for typically Tanya, but how did you choose a female protagonist for your story?
Okay, it's fascinating that you mentioned that I've been asked this question so many times because I have. More often than not, this question is disguised as a kind of taunt, where I'm often asked, why a woman and why not a man, or vice versa, why um, how did you think you had the confidence to write from the first perspective when you were talking about a woman? And I think it's a very pertinent question as well. In this day and age when we do have to grapple with patriarchy, we have to recognize how patriarchal demands can often influence the way we deal with each other? So it's a very relevant question. Um, I try not to answer the question in the same way because it's now been 4 years since typically Tanya came out, and I initially would tell the story of how the character emerged in newsroom many years ago when I was working one night. I believe it was a Tuesday night, and we were done with the pages at the newspaper I used to work at then. And this voice came to me, and it just pursued that voice, changed it around a little bit. But lately, and this is something that I have grown equally conscious of in the last maybe year or so, that it's very difficult to talk about this protagonist without talking about the thin fictional disguise I was using. Because lately I've become very interested in the way the boundaries between fiction and autobiography work in my own uh, literary output. I don't think that Tanya is any different from me. Initially, I would
Okay.
try very hard to detach myself from that character because I felt that the character required a life of its own. But
Right.
lately, I've realized that there is a thin or scanty fictional disguise that I use. She could be an alter ego. She could be someone who is a lot braver than I am in many respects. And that's why I felt it was important to see where I could take this, taking and by disconnecting myself and giving her some of my attributes and some of my strengths and weaknesses. Let's put it like that. So one of the main things I believe when we talk about fiction is that you may forget the story, but the character remains in
True.
your mind.
True.
And if we argue that the character remains in your mind, the character has to be memorable. And it has to be memorable not in the best way possible, it could be in the worst way possible. So I wanted to see if I could experiment with this character. Um, this narrative is filtered through the first person voice, narrative perspective. And I was very conscious that it had to go in the first person narrative perspective. Initially, I thought the third person perspective made sense, but I didn't like the way the story was emerging. So the first person voice allowed me to play a little bit of a trick. I was able to delve into the mind of this character and present it without any varnish, so to speak, this no holds barred account. So what I believe is that Tanya is an empath. She's there for all of her friends when she needs to be, but that doesn't always come through because it's a story that's told through timestamps. Some people argue it's like a dear diary format. Actually, it's timestamps that I imagined it's happening. She's not writing it down. She's not scribbling anything down. She's just thinking all those thoughts. Um, so you have this ingress into her mind. You know that she is thinking all these things, and oftentimes it's not flattering things that she has to say about people. So I felt that that was an interesting device because I wanted to see by the end of the book, do people admire her? Do it was kind of like my attempt at daring the reader to admire a character like this, who, from the word go, is not entirely appealing. Is not entirely someone who is apologetic about the way she feels and reckons with reality in her own way, breaking rules as she goes along, making decisions that are unpopular. So I think one would argue she is an alter ego, but I think it's also like a thin fictional disguise and a trick that I play with the character, with the reader. Something that I do feel I wanted to do later on as well. Um, One thing I realized with this book is that in the first person narrative perspective, so many people were put off by her right at the beginning. And it was right until the end, the last stage, that they sympathized with her. And there were others who didn't sympathize with her. And there were people who sympathized with her from the beginning of the book. So it was interesting to see the diverse spectrum of reactions to this one character. And yeah, I admire that. And the next novel, which will be out next year, what I tried to do was that I allowed the character to never emerge at all.
Okay.
You see her through other people.
Mm, that's very
So
interesting.
it's
It's ve-
like, well, whereas Tanya gives you everything, you have
yes.
this
We
doorway into her mind. In the other book, which will be out hopefully next year, you don't really have that access to her mind. So yeah.
that's so interesting, and a lot of tips for budding writers, I'm sure, over there as to how you can play different characters. And another thing was that one sees vivid shades of Karachi in your narrative. So, how would you think that growing up in Karachi has that affected your writing? Would you say?
So oddly enough, this particular book was not influenced by my childhood years in Karachi. It was Karachi I discovered as an adult. Um, I've lived here all my life, Karachi born and bred. My love for Karachi is often ridiculed that you're obsessed with the city. Why do you have to obsess over it so much? But this is where I grew up, and the Karachi that I grew up in was a chaotic city. Um, because those were the turbulent MQM years. Things were not looking very good, and that's where I grew up. I went to school in a city where, um, there would be strikes, there would be the occasional paya jam, there would be some protest, something going on, some bomb blast. So that's the Karachi I knew. But the Karachi that I depicted in typically Tanya was a very different Karachi, Karachi that was in a state of flux. Uh, the narrative begins in 2016. Uh, that was 2 years after I moved back to the city after uh, studying abroad. And a year before that, 2015, the year before before the narrative begins, we see that the MQM's wings have been clipped uh, through the 9/0 raid and all of those things. And we see a transformed Karachi, um, a Karachi that um, perhaps is inching towards peace, for the lack of a better word. But obviously, that's a very, you know, difficult thing to say because it wasn't exactly the most peaceful city even back then. But the Karachi that emerges is that of the Karachi that I saw as an adult, and the world I experienced. In my previous novel, before Typically Tanya, a novel called A Rift and Rivalry, which is not very widely known, um, the Karachi that emerges is a Karachi of nostalgia, a Karachi that I was told about. And even then, the violence that afflicted the city is not dealt with. It's really just the the story of people in that city, which is often disconnected from the city. So I think as far as the influence of Karachi is, it sort of it is the backdrop of the city. One would argue it's the character. Like in Typically Tanya, there is a glossary, not of Urdu words, which I refuse to translate, but a glossary that is like a geographical map of the city. So wherever she's going is actually it's the world that she belongs to. So to understand her, you have to understand her world,
Yes.
and it is a world that is uh, deeply political, deeply chaotic, and at times tumultuous. That's
Yeah.
for the lack of a better word. So yeah.
Ne- yeah, Karachi definitely has its magnetic pull, and
Right.
and it does. So, and another thing is that you did mention was that there are different shades to Tanya, as there are to all of us. So, while we see that Tanya looks out for people and is caring, and but at times she doesn't hesitate to call them out. So,
Mhm.
generally speaking, how difficult would you think it is for such a strongly independent young person to deal with others' weaknesses and flaws around them? Life is so fast and hectic as it is portrayed for Tanya, and she's working, and she has to manage a social life.
Okay, so as I established earlier, she's an empath. Most people have this assumption that empaths are just sitting there on the phone, listening to their friends' problems, sympathizing with them, but they're people too. They're going to have moments when they can't pour from that empty cup. They need their time. And more often than not, when you're dealing with an empath, um, there's, I mean, the word you used just now, magnetic pull for Karachi, I feel like empaths have that magnetic pull as well. People come to them with their problems, knowing that they're going to find a shoulder to cry on. And that's what they do with Tanya. It doesn't come through all the way because that first person narrative perspective tends to obscure that view of Tanya as the empath. Um, I think to answer this question, I'd like to highlight the difference between an empath and a dark empath. Usually, a dark empath is someone, I mean, you're familiar, you have some basis in psychology as well. So, a dark empath is someone who gets information usually and manipulates it in their own favor.
Uses it against you, yeah.
Yes. So, she's not like that. She uses it against her in her mind. She's like, I could do this, I could do that. But she's right there making things happen for them, making things easier for them. So her friend Sonia, who's her frenemy right at the beginning of the book, they have quite a few conflicts. Um, they tend to we tend to forget that in that relationship as well, things don't always go right. So with Sonia, she when Sonia's having these problems in her life, Tanya doesn't want to be a part of it, but she's right there. She's right there making the choices she wants to make, and she's available. So I don't know if it's easy for people to get back to your question, who are strong and independent to deal with people's quirks. Tanya doesn't handle those quirks very well, but she learns to laugh at them, which is what I feel shines through in the book.
True. Yes. We'll come back to it. Another very interesting and a very strong character is Tanya's mother. And not to give too much away, but the mother daughter relationship is codependent and sometimes quite a struggle for Tanya to be on the same page as her mother. And would you say that after a certain age, parents need to be a little less controlling towards their children, especially as they enter adult age in our region, in our part of the
I
world?
suppose what ends up happening in our part of the world is that we cohabit with our parents. It's a funny way of thinking about it, but we're basically cohabiting with them. So there are certain boundaries that need to be navigated and negotiated in a way that works for both parties. And Tanya's relationship with her mother, I like the way you use the word codependent. I never thought of it like that, but I think I see it more like a friendship that is cultivated over time. Over the experiences that they've seen together, because Tanya comes from a broken home. The father is not in the picture. He is still married to the mother, but has a wife of his own because apparently that's allowed in this country. Um, so he isn't there. And something that I feel, I believe you pointed it out the other day, that the mother seems to be stuck in time. It's almost the static um,
A limbo
feels.
kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, she's just in this uh, warp of
Wo-
some kind. So I wonder, I wondered when you said that the other day when we were discussing the session that, is Tanya pulling her out? And I think I agree. And that's what a good friendship is about. It's just, you navigate those boundaries, you help each other, The book begins with a scene with her mother, and it ends with a scene with her mother. And it's really just about that parent-child relationship and what happens in the middle. So
Right.
on the one hand, you have friendships that are the friendships that you cultivate over time, the friendships that are you grow up with, like your school friends, your university friends, your work friends, and then there are the friendships that you build with the people you live with, your mothers, your fathers, your children. That is one thing as well. We don't even think of them as friendships. Like we're living in the same space. It's
Yeah.
not a friendship. You're not my friend if you're my brother.
No,
But
I would term it more as learning from each other, but at the same
yeah,
nurturing each other, and then
no,
at the same time, what my point was that as a parent, letting your child go after a certain while.
letting your
I
child go.
what I felt was, again, I don't want to give any spoilers,
By all
but
means, I
maybe the
would just
maybe the mother does not want Tanya to go through whatever she went through. I don't know. Looking, just she's looking out.
I think that is the case. That is the case.
That's
I, I,
there.
I wouldn't I wouldn't discredit that at all because there are so many things that the mother says. Okay, right at the beginning, why are you going in a career? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that?
She
We don't know
she
why the parents got divorced,
she
or
looks
not
out.
divorced, why they got separated. But there is something there that maybe she's trying to shield her daughter from.
True. Yeah.
Tanya is
And
also very conscious of the fact that her father is not in the picture. We don't see the father at all, but there's a scene that is mentioned in the fifth or the sixth chapter, I forget, where she looks back at her college days when she and her friend Sonia, who, as I mentioned earlier, they're frenemies, but back then they were very good friends. And she comes to know that her father's new wife lives in the Seaview apartments. And Tanya lives somewhere near East Street, not very far away from the Seaview apartments. So she decides to go see her stepmother, but not disclose the fact that she is the stepchild. So she goes and she takes another name, and that woman knows that it's Tanya, and Tanya knows it's that woman, and she just wants to see who this woman is. There's no rancor, there's nothing. And when we inhabit Tanya's story, she has come out of that misery. She's come out of that phase of her life where she's obsessed with her parents' relationship. But
yes,
and I do believe maybe she has a certain degree of bitterness towards her mother for that. It doesn't shine through because there is a lot of love there as well.
true. Yeah.
Uh, but
But yes,
that
there is
love,
an underlying tone, slight
yeah,
underlying, yeah, and
yeah,
that's
it seems like a yeah, continue.
that is, a very that makes for very fascinating research. Research shows that children from dysfunctional families often have trust issues, especially in forming new bonds, often and new romantic bonds. So, in your opinion, does Tanya face issues with people because of her family dynamics? At a
That's
certain level,
amazing.
then the trust comes in.
That's amazing. You brought this up because one of my initial reviewers said, the next Tipiti Tanya novel, which is not on the cards, by the way, but at the time it seemed like the story hadn't ended. There should be a sequel. Um, this reviewer was excellent, and she said something like, the next Tanya novel should be more psychological in nature. Maybe we can figure out if Tanya needs a few therapy sessions. And I flirted with the idea of writing a sequel called Tanya in Therapy, which to go with the alliteration, typically Tanya as well. And I realized that yes, she has some deep-seated trust issues. Why does every man, every romantic possibility get ruled out so easily? Is it because she is reluctant to try? Is it because she struggles to see the point of being in something like this? That's something that is important. Many people thought that, Tanya's story should have ended with her marriage. It ends in a different way. Let's not tell readers that, but it does not end with her marriage. It is a romantic comedy, I would argue. Uh, Someone I know calls it the anti rom com, which is fascinating because you think that with this, pop of yellow and all this talk of finding true love on the back cover text would mean that she's going to end up married. But no, she doesn't. She finds another destiny for herself. Um, and I wondered at that point in time because typically Tanya is set in a time when Tanya is 20 something. I believe I thought she was 25, 25, 26, um, which is actually the perfect age for someone like that. And she's kind of at the brink of her 30s, but not quite there, kind of like an adult. And I don't believe that these days people in their 20s are adults, they behave like teenagers. So she's not exactly very mature. And at that point, I feel like now in retrospect, it's better that she doesn't end up with a marriage at the end because her prospects are not exactly reliable people. Then they're people who were extremely dubious. Even the man who is her friend is extremely dubious. Even the men she meets along the way, the the main conflict of the book, which is the Tanya Sonia rift, the friendship, is over a man, and eventually that gets resolved. But that man is also very problematic. So I don't know why she wouldn't have trust issues if she had such prospects. That's
Yes.
what I feel. But
No, despite all that she's gone through, the family's gone through, Tanya still has done very well till that age for herself, and it's quite like you said earlier. It's quite admirable that she's got a career. She's holding up, but you see that brave, that bravery, but you still see that vulnerability at the same time. But something else, there's a back voice going on all the time. What she's thinking is or not always what she enacts upon. If she's thinking
yeah,
like ill of someone, yeah, she doesn't want to do something, but she'll still put up a brave front or a polite smile for someone. And that's where
uh-huh.
I bring the humor in, the tongue-in-cheek humor. Taha, every time I pick up the book, I'm like besides myself with laughter. So was it just for Tanya, or would you say that you're a witty person? Yeah, and any incidences that were triggered by real life events, do share with your
Okay,
viewers.
so oddly enough, when people read this book, the people who know me, they're like, "हाँ, you would say this, तुम तो ये ऐसे बोलते हो, तुम तो वैसे बोलते हो." There is a humorous streak to me. So a few days ago, I met somebody, and she was just wondering, "Okay, how old are you now?" I'm like, "I'm 31," and she's like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "I thought you looked 20 something," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then at that point, you should just acknowledge the fact that people think you're younger. But I went ahead and said, "Oh, it seems like you've aged." So
How did
because
she
I'm so
take
old,
that? How did she
I don't
take
think she
that?
I don't think she registered it because I whispered it. But this is something Tanya would say. I would probably hold back because which is why I said it in this very soft voice, but she would say it so openly. Um, the humor is perhaps a mixture of what I went through or what I've often have this humor, and the experiences are taken from the people in my life. A large part of this book is based on reality. It is based not entirely on my reality because that just opens the floodgates to, or where is he getting this information from? What is his life like? No, um, it's people in my life, people who I've spoken to, people who were a part of a specific section of my life, a specific segment of my 20s. And it also depicts a time that was very, at the risk of using that word, it was very sensitive and chaotic. So at that time, we couldn't possibly survive without humor. Um, I also felt that this book was not meant to be a funny book. It was meant to be a satirical take on a particular period in this woman's life, a slice of life, romantic comedy. But the comedy was supposed to be like this, you know, this add-on, nothing so important. I was tempted to write something very different because my first novel, A Rift and Rivalry, was a, a very bleak, very depressing book. Something that my mother pointed out, that, there's a lot of sadness in this book. Why is there so much sadness in your work? And I believe that is the folly of youth, that you tend to derive a lot of pleasure from writing something very sad. But the other folly of youth is to write a very humorous book, and often without any inhibitions. So this book was written with no inhibitions. I look at it now, I read the sentences, and I'm like, did I actually say this? How dare I write this? Is what I wonder. Um, there are certain sentences that just sort of pop out, and I think, oh my God, why did I say this? I shouldn't have said this. Maybe it's now at this age when I'm just like, okay, I should not say this anymore. So there are certain inhibitions that come in, especially with the humor. Um, I wouldn't say that the humor is something that leaves you chuckling for days. There are moments in the book, like um, I believe I'd heard of this Pakistani girl who convinced everyone in her university that some Bollywood song was the national anthem of our country. And they used to play it all the time for her, that we're playing your national anthem. And she would just play along with it, thinking that, okay, that's the way it is. And she would be laughing at them because they think, who are these Goras? Why are they doing these things? Why do they believe this lie that I've told them? So I had to squeeze that into the narrative somehow. I like to believe that writers tend to plagiarize experiences, so they will always keep their eyes peeled for something that is happening, and they will find a way to manifest that in their fiction. So there is a mixture of my own reality and the reality of those around me, the experiences that I've heard of.
Okay, and there have been lots of viewers' comments. Nashmia Khan says typically Tanya is a great piece of writing, and
So
then we have
thank you.
other. Then she's asking, who is your favorite character in the book?
My favorite character in the book. I don't like to keep favorites, but the character that I admire the most um, would be Khirat, because she is the narrative foil to Tanya. Of course, I admire Tanya because in many ways she is the most vulnerable out of everyone in that book, and she suffers the most at the end, I feel. Um, this is actually a story about friendships in their 20s and how life changes for people. So, sometimes you're just left
A
hanging
lot of
there. Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely, I
Go
agree, and
ahead,
it's
you're
a lot
saying
of
something.
growing up, a lot of growing
Yeah,
up, evolution, and
yeah.
like you said, it's based in reality. So that's what my next query was, that the political scenario in the book, and you've written in 20, it's set in 2016, is almost the same today as it was in the story, for Pakistan
Uh,
politics. So how do you concern with yourself with political correctness?
okay, so technically, I believe that politics should be distanced from any literary pursuit. Um, Not because politics doesn't matter. Every word you write is political in some way or the other. But if I had written this from a different narrative perspective, maybe I would not have included so much about the politics. It would have just been the backdrop, but this was Tanya's personal opinion, and everyone is entitled to those opinions. That's why when it comes to political correctness, I do try to, especially when I'm writing fiction, I try not to take the side of the oppressor, or at least in some way try not to take the side of anyone who is not in the right. That's what I feel is something I owe that to my reader. I feel. Yes, there will be people with problematic political leanings, and they have a right to be there, but there has to be a counter to that somewhere. That's how it is, because fiction is not a kind of propaganda. Sometimes you have to recognize that fiction comes with a lot of responsibility. It's a reflection of reality. So you
Very
have
true.
to balance everything out. Otherwise, everyone will say, "Oh, you've written a manifesto against a political party. You've written something against someone else." That's not right. You don't want to be recognized as like um, a tout for a particular political persuasion or something like that. That's not how you want to be remembered. You want to be remembered for the stories you write. So yeah.
Very true. Nashmia Khan asks, would you want to see your book produced as a movie or a telefilm? And would you want to direct it yourself?
Okay, so
It's
oddly enough, I wouldn't mind seeing it on screen. Um, I do feel that I wouldn't be able to direct it, so I would probably want to give this to somebody else and say, okay, you do the script, you do everything, because I don't know anything about script writing. Let's be very honest. Um, I can churn out dialogue, but I can't churn out stuff that people will probably watch on television. It's going to be rather dull. So I wouldn't mind. But I would keep some distance. It'll almost be like giving your child to somebody else and seeing what they can do with book. Not that I feel your books are your children, but they're a part of you. So why not?
Yes, because what I personally feel is that Tanya, the novel, has all the right ingredients. You know, romance and the right blend of subtle humor. You know, and then
I think
what's
it
going
would
to
make a
happen
good web
next?
series.
Yeah,
I think it would make a good web series. I don't know about a good film because what this book does is it has a lot of drama, but it oftentimes doesn't have the kind of action that people want. There are points when the narrative lags because I wanted to make it realistic. So there are moments in the day when there's nothing going on, and I wanted that depicted. I couldn't do without that. So it, I think
that
short 20 minutes, 15, 20-minute episodes of a maybe 5 or 6 part web series, maybe that makes sense. But nothing more than that. Nothing.
but
But
as
I
a
do,
reader,
however, Boli?
I did want to know, for me, why I feel it was a page turner was because I did want to know, okay, what happens next? Okay, how does she, there a lot of issues going on you're bringing a lot of things together, matters with the friends, the workplace. And coming to the workplace, you brought up a very strong, you haven't, what I really liked about the story was that you haven't shied about bringing some very strong issues there's something, about workplace harassment. And so, just to get your opinion on, is that how real is that in today's world, where given all the surveillance and the security measures, does it still prevail? And any laws that have been actively implemented in your idea, since you're a journalist and as well?
I wouldn't want to get into the laws, but when I wrote this book, um, this was pre Me Too. So the decision that Tanya took when she was subjected to workplace harassment was that she walked out. She said, I can't tolerate this. I'm very sorry. I have a lot of respect for you, but I'm sorry. And that is a very typical reaction at that time. She didn't hashtag Me Too because that wasn't a concept back then. But it is a reality in this day and age. And the reason why I brought it up was because I wanted to highlight this issue because it happens with so many women in the media. And there are a large number of women in the media in this day and age. Um, their security is far more important than any other consideration. So we have to value that. I'm not particularly sure about the laws because I myself have been like out of it for the last few months, but um, I do feel that policies in the workplace need to be stronger. In these situations, even whistleblowing laws need to be stronger because most private companies they do tend to encourage whistleblowing contractually, but they frown upon it. So even these things, it's awful that such a thing comes under whistleblowing at times. That you're blowing a cover or you're saying something. They don't technically cannot come under whistleblowing, but you're exposing something that's happening within your organization, and you're giving a bad name to your organization. So these things tend to be brushed under the carpet. But lately, I've realized that harassment is being taken more seriously, but a lot more can be done.
Yes, and from what I know, that men are also harassed, if not equally, but yeah, men are also harassed at certain level. And on the flip side, would you agree that people have might be a little bit more wary of approaching someone for being called out or having their motives misconstrued, especially after the Me Too movement?
I think
Have you?
now more so, people have become very, very conscious of these things. Initially, people would get away with saying anything and everything, but I'm glad that people are able to respect boundaries, or at least be afraid of crossing boundaries. I don't want to think that they respect boundaries because they don't. They just know their consequences, so they just, you know, keep mum, or they just try to maintain a distance that they should be maintaining generally. So yeah.
Okay, there's another interesting question by Nashmia Khan. She says, love the quirky element in the book covers illustration. It's very eye catching. I agree. Please tell us more about the thought behind it.
Okay, so there were multiple ideas that were put forward. There are lots of covers that were suggested, but I loved the yellow. I just thought it was excellent. So if you can see it, if you can hold it up as well. I don't know. So right where you see Tanya's glasses, there are certain images. That is the Qaid-e-Azam's Mazar
Yes,
and the Mutta Palace. Um,
that's
and these
Karachi.
images, yeah, they're basically symbols of landmarks in the city, um, which obviously she's seeing the city through her lens. Her romance is with the city, it's not with a particular person, which I think is a delightful
Concept. It's a very
evocation of love,
interesting.
because we often forget that love is not about the romantic aspects, it's about our surroundings. So what I admired about this is this independent women, the woman with, she doesn't have red glasses, but I thought it was quirky that they went ahead with it.
Yes.
And it's fascinating because there was a time when people started making book covers, their costumes or something. I don't know why they were doing it. I don't remember what it was. But if someone I know, or a reader of the book, decided to dress up like Tanya, I think that image is somewhere on social media. I don't know where, but um, it's just fascinating how the cover became the central point of so much. People pick up the book for the cover. I've realized over time. So
That is so interesting. And so, do you prefer writing in your free time to a 9 to 5 job? Just that's something that would be a very
nine to
insightful
five
tip for
pays the
writers.
writing
When
doesn't.
do you
The
carve out the
nine
time to write?
the 9 to 5 pays the bills. The writing doesn't. Let's be honest. I am at the moment a full-time writer. I don't know what that entails, but I teach a few times a week. That pays the bills. Um, and on occasion, I write something that pays me something, which is great. But ideally, I would love to have a 9 to 5 job that allows me to write. I don't know how. structured and regimented the writing regime should be. I know some people write 200 words a day, some people write 1,000 words a day. When I was working on a manuscript, and I don't spend more than about 6 to 9 months on the first draft of a manuscript, because I like to weave that in, and I'd like to like throw it into this process of editing that it's a process of self-editing. It takes me about a year to work on that manuscript. And there are multiple drafts that are annotated. So when I do that serious writing, when I'm working on a novel, I try to write about 1,000 words a day. If I'm writing for myself, I usually scribble into a diary, or I um, just make notes somewhere, and that is a little unstructured in the sense that um, it works for me. But I don't think it seems ideal to say that I write a certain number of words a day, but I suppose it's based on the deadlines as well.
That those are very insightful tips for writers and budding writers. And would you say that writing is a glamorous profession?
I don't think so. I don't think I've said this before. Writers aren't celebrities. You don't see us promoting brands. I think someone like Twinkle Khanna would probably promote a phone or something, which is a writer, and Mrs. Funny Bones, hilarious. But I don't think people like us who are rather unglamorous. I mean, I'm sitting here dressed rather unglamorously in my
That's
writer's attire.
But
So
there is
I don't think
appreciation. There
there
is
is
a lot of
appreciation.
appreciation
There is appreciation. I think
and
um,
acknowledgement.
there is acknowledgement, of course, but it's. I don't think the writing process is glamorous in any way, because there are points when you feel like you're assailed by writer's block, you're struggling. And then there are points when you're like, okay, I seem to have this covered. That's great. So, yeah, I don't think it's glamorous at all.
Okay. So we'll do a quick rapid fire round. Okay. Are you okay? Good for that?
I'm up
And,
for it. I don't know how it'll go, but okay.
okay. So your favorite book?
My favorite book. I always say The God of Small Things because I keep going back to it, but I need to change that very soon. Yeah,
And top three favorite Pakistani authors?
I would say Amir Hussain, Kamla Shamsi, and I would argue that some of Sana Munir's stories are excellent. They're very interesting, and of course Sara Suleri, the fourth. I think she's right up there with Amir.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
No doubt, great writers. And future of ebooks in Pakistan.
promising, extremely promising. I believe the Little Book Company is doing an excellent job with ebooks. It's cost
Being,
effective.
yeah, yeah. And I think the need of the day as well. On the go,
Needed,
I
yeah,
think it's like
exactly,
it's
exactly.
like even though nothing beats paperbacks and hardcover books.
Nothing
Okay,
beats paperback. Yeah.
yeah, that's my like love. Being an editor or a journalist.
Okay, this is interesting because
You're both.
I I love I edit all the time. I think editing is very important, but I admire chasing stories as well. In my as an editor, I can inhabit this ivory tower. I don't need to engage with anyone, and I can be this figure that everyone fears. Uh, as a journalist, which I don't do anymore, I don't report as readily. I don't think I've ever done extensive beat reporting. I've always been an editor, but whenever I have done it, I found the process engaging but time consuming. So I prefer having that editing job. It calms me down. I can work at my pace, and I could also be feared, which I love as well. So
Right. And so, any you did mention a mystery novel. So, when about are we looking forward to that?
hopefully next year. I hope I'm in the process of
Okay.
working on it. I'm very happy about it because it's one book that um, really is very close to me. It's something that it deals with issues of grief, very different from typically Tanya. Um, One would say every character is an extension of the previous one, so this character is also perhaps similar and different in so many ways. Um, it's about, as I said, grief. It's about death. It's about the murkier side of things, which we don't usually see in a book like typically Tanya.
Yeah.
There is no mention of aggressive heartbreak or anything. It's a casual read, easy casual read that like gives you certain life lessons as well. But this novel, the new one, is very different from that, and I call it a postmodern detective novel. Um, it's not the cliche detective novel. There is no detective. It's about the reader trying to figure out what's going on. And as I said earlier, you barely get to see the protagonist. You see her through other people's eyes.
That's very
So yeah.
interesting. Looking forward to that. And your e-anthology, Tales from Karachi, has done very well. And volume one was published last year. So are we looking forward to volume two?
I will take my time with volume two, I've realized, because a lot of things have just emerged lately in terms of work. Um, but it's ever so available for everyone. Anyone wants to contribute, they can. Tales from Karachi began as an Instagram anthology, and an it basically reflects my love for the city. And the things I
That's
couldn't do was in my other narratives was discover new stories about Karachi. So I feel like other people can discover those stories, and this is a platform for them. Um, so yeah, I'm really hoping that the E anthology keeps growing with time. Um, the print anthology, the second one, I want to be a bit different with that. I'm still trying to come up with a theme that works for me. I feel like the theme that has really worked is ghost stories. Everyone loves to read a Karachi ghost story.
yeah.
Everyone, you yourself have written a Karachi ghost story for the
Uh,
first volume of Tales from Karachi, so you're familiar with that. That those competitions in the anthology did very well.
yes.
So I'm thinking maybe something along those lines.
Yeah. Ghosts
Everyone
of
loves a good ghost
Karachi,
story.
maybe.
Yeah,
Ghosts of Karachi.
good
Because
story. Yeah,
again,
exactly.
there is a fascination for ghost stories and mysteries. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Mm,
And can we
exactly.
please request you to read out your favorite passage from your novel?
Okay, so I usually read a very specific section of the book because I think it's easier to read that. But I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to read from just a very brief segment from a chapter called Dhanno in the Indian. It's September 15, 2016. It's 11:30 p.m. Hafiz and I drive down to Seaview Road in stony silence. Usually, when he picks me up for a late night ice cream binge, we drive around the city in his blue Alto. The car, which Hafiz lovingly calls Dhanno, has with time become a character in our friendship. As Dhanno would ply the potholed streets of Karachi from Do Darya and Clifton to Bandar Park and Kimari, the rumble of her engine provided the background noise for our endless discussions on politics. When we were talking about people, Dhanno would squeak along as if to contribute to our gossip session. When our conversation would lose momentum and Hafiz would switch on the radio and croon old songs in his gruff voice, Dhanno would fall silent and provide an audience check. Meanwhile, I'd frown as he'd hum and butcher the lyrics of the songs with reckless abandon. But today, Dhanno is unusually quiet. Hafiz hasn't even switched on the radio. His silence is a painful a reminder of the subtle shifts in our relationship. When Hafiz is angry, he makes it a point to vent his frustrations and make a production out of his emotions. When he does this, I'm reminded of the days when mummy and daddy used to fight in their room, while I'd cover my ears with my headphones and listen to Abda Parveen of all people to drown out their screaming voices. But I'm much too preoccupied to obsess over his silence. From the time I've left home, I've been bombarded with text messages from Inder. The steady conversation, flow of conversation doesn't frighten me. In fact, I find myself strangely entertained. The man has an incredible sense of humor and a witty, bitchy streak that leaves me giggling. Why I chose this passage was because you wanted to discuss the book from a psychological standpoint. And one of the things that I felt this passage depicted very briefly was her relationship with her parents, her relationship with this man, the observations she has about him. It also talks about just how she can distance herself from her narrative as well. The story is told from the perspective of Dhanno, the story of their friendship, of Dhanno the alto. So it was so in a way though at that point this inanimate object is the vantage point through which you view that friendship. And I thought it was fascinating because she in a way distances herself from explaining that friendship to the reader, which is what I found was fascinating. Yeah.
Absolutely. This is what, shines through, that despite all that she's gone through and whatever she's going through, there's this very innate humane streak, that, and
Mm.
with Tanya, that is very relatable, and likable at a certain stage. So this has been a very enlightening conversation. Thank you, Taha, for your time, and thank you for being here. And
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, Liberty Books. And
thank
I
you.
hope everyone enjoyed the session. And it wasn't as repetitive as we would have wanted it to be.
Yes,
So yeah,
and thank you to Liberty Books for providing us with this forum. And the book, typically Tanya by Taha Kehar, is available at all Liberty Books outlets throughout Pakistan and online. So you can even order this book online, and they ship worldwide. Thank you so much for
thank you
everyone,
so
for to the viewers, for
thank you
being
so much.
here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Liberty Books. Thank you.